All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Happy Sunday. As always, we hope that everybody is able to maintain your best physical, mental, and spiritual health during these times and through all times. Okay. And we're just really happy that you decided to spend your Sunday afternoon here with us talking about another important topic. This is the 18th week in a row that Shakur and I have done these seminar presentations. So we're just really glad that you're all here with us, and we welcome you to participate either by, if you're on Zoom, you can go to the chat room, and we would love to address any questions or concerns you have. And then on Facebook, of course, you can comment on Facebook and we'll address that as well. So again, thank you all for being here. And as always, we start by giving acknowledgement and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And we do that because we acknowledge that the fundamental problem that they face as a people, and they've said this countless times, is that their land is stolen from them and they want their land back. They want their sacred territories back. They want the Paha Sapa, or what they call Mount Rushmore. They want all of that back. There are people whose culture is closely tied to living off the land, and they're not able to do that in reservation life. So they want their land back. And we intend to do everything that we can to assist them in that process because it's theirs and it properly belongs to them. So we thank them and acknowledge them. And of course, we acknowledge our African ancestors who are the reason we are here. They fought from the eastern shores of Africa all the way to the western shores of the Western Hemisphere. They fought against oppression. And we're just so thankful to them for sacrificing so much so that we can be here today to hopefully contribute to the struggle that we inherited from them. And also, we thank all peace and justice loving people on earth. No matter who you are or where you come from. There are a lot of people who are making sincere efforts to contribute to the voice against injustice. And, we encourage you to keep going, continue to engage in that struggle. Your efforts are gaining traction. They're very important. And, we have to just continue to turn the heat up even more. So we're thankful you all are here for this very important discussion on racism. Is it individual or systemic? And of course, there's a lot of discussion about this. So what we're going to spend the next hour doing is talking about it in the context of how we see it, with the analysis that we provide to it through this program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, as always, every week. And so we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing we want to do, always with introductions, Ajamu Umi is my name, longtime organizer, All African People's Revolutionary Party. I've organized for the party all over the African world, 3 continents in the Caribbean. And then joining me, as always, every week, is my amazing and outstanding daughter, Shakura, who grew up in the All African People's Revolutionary Party's Young Pioneer Institute program. And so she's been with us since she took her first breath, and now she's working on her doctorate degree, which she will not use just to gain profit, but she will use to make a contribution towards humanity. She understands, and her work illustrates it. Her activist work on the ground where she is illustrates that she fully understands that she has education because of those who sacrificed before her. And so the education doesn't belong to her individually, like individual property. It belongs to the masses of people, and her responsibility is to use that education to improve the conditions for the masses of people. So I am honored and proud to be, as always, participating with her. And just so you know, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, our objective is Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. One unified socialist Africa. We see that as a solution to the problems impacting 2 billion African people living in almost 120 countries worldwide today. And as Kwame Nkrumah, our founder, indicated in the book you see there, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare and Class Struggle in Africa, that he wrote in 1968 and 69, 70 respectively. Until Africa is free, no African anywhere on earth will be free. And so in this book here, the handbook, he had a strategy that he articulated that would facilitate us achieving Pan-Africanism. And that strategy was the unification of all Pan-African organizations on the ground in Africa. And so for the last 50 years, the AAPRP's work has been facilitating that strategy as laid out in the handbook you see before you. So the Pan-Africanist Congress, the PAC logo you see there, they're an active organization of hundreds of thousands of people in Azania, or what you call South Africa. And they are of the objective of achieving one unified socialist Africa, and we have a sister relationship with them. The African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the PAIGC, the party founded by Amilcar Cabral, who was a co-founder of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party in Guinea-Bissau. Their objective, one unified socialist Africa. We obviously have a sister relationship with them. The Democratic Party of Guinea, the party founded by Sékou Touré, who gave refuge to Amilcar Cabral and Kwame Nkrumah when imperialism, sought to assassinate both of those revolutionaries. And the PDG still exists today in Guinea, and of course they're a sister party to our efforts. The Azanian People's Organization in Azania, the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School, Nigeria, the Pan-African Movement for the Zimbabwe movements, of Pan-African Socialists, of course, and the Pan-African Union for Sierra Leone, and many others that are evolving and developing. These are all organizations with the objective of one unified socialist Africa, and we work as one with them. And then we also, because we know we don't struggle in a vacuum, we not only have chapters all over the world, but we have relationships with other liberation movements, strong principled relationships with organizations like the American Indian Movement, the Red Nation, and other organizations who fight for indigenous rights here in the Western Hemisphere, the Palestinian National Liberation Movement. We have strong connections with them. The Filipino National Liberation Movement, we have strong relationships with them. The Irish Republican Socialist Network, we have strong relationships with them. All of these folks are fighting against the same enemies we're fighting against. So we see them and our struggle as one. We're not in a vacuum. We're part of a worldwide movement that's fighting to overthrow imperialism. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for joining us, and I will turn it over to Shakur.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much, Daddy. I appreciate being on these calls. As I've said before, I'm grateful for all of you, and I hope that you find that you are in a place of healthy status and peace to some extent, however you define that. This continues to be a humbling experience for me as well. And I am just grateful that each week we can walk away with more and more information, because we are choosing to walk away with that information, which means showing up. So to echo my dad, again, thank you for giving us your time. And in addition to that, hopefully not only are we choosing to show up, but we're also choosing to disseminate and to share this information in our constant, daily interactions that we are having with other people. So I thank you all for your time. And without further ado, the concept of race, meaning different races, is a social construct, just as gender is a social construct. What this means is the concept of race was created and perpetuated because it served and serves the interests of the ruling class of capitalist people who depend upon white supremacy to justify their brutal subjugation and exploitation of Africa's rare earth minerals and human labor, as well as the theft of indigenous lands and the construction of all of the capitalist empires which rule the earth today. White supremacy was the cover that has been used for 500 plus years to provide a justification for why Africa and Africans, indigenous people, etc., are poor, in prison, etc., and seemingly unable to determine their own destinies. Under the cloak of white supremacy, all of this is explained as a phenomenon of our peoples just not making the right decisions and not being able to be accountable to the capitalist standard of hard work and determination to be successful. Clearly, The recent economic bailout of large corporations who have suffered from the pandemic is proof positive that economic challenge isn't about, air quotes, making bad decisions, close quotes, because if this is what is everyone would be telling these corporations who wouldn't be able to make it through 30 days of a shutdown without crumbling. So in other words, we're saying that this is the ideology that people should have saved up and whatnot, but we don't have that to say for these big corporations. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword where it's like, how is it one way for the corporations, but somewhere else for people who are struggling and just as easily being laid off for their jobs because of COVID-19 as well. Saying all that to say, without question, this belief that oppressed people are the ones responsible for our oppression is a tool of white supremacy designed to take the blame away from where it rightly belongs. The capitalist system, which was built and is maintained by exploiting us. For anyone who doesn't believe the necessity of systematizing this exploitive system, we ask you to explain to us how we could communicate right now without the exploitation of the cobalt stolen from the Congo to power these internet devices that give and receive signals. We ask you to explain how you will have clothes that were not stitched with materials by hands in exploited countries. We ask you to choose a meal that isn't reflexive in exploited labor. We ask you to show us an automobile that wasn't assembled with exploited labor from materials stolen from Africa, You cannot do these things because this entire system of capitalism was built and is sustained based on systemic and exploitive practices so normalized that most people have no idea about the examples we just provided. They do not know because white supremacy is a philosophy that has ensured for them that the world is the way it is because they are more blessed, they are more favored, and basically better in every way than the poor exploited people who provide for every need that makes this planet function while receiving absolutely nothing in return. That is the myth that most people in industrialized capitalist countries believe, that the truth is your life and the system you live in under is the product of a system designed to subjugate the majority of people on Earth in order to provide the resources required to fuel this capitalist system. And you? Well, we are given, air quotes, crumbs, i.e. jobs, houses, cars, vacations, etc., to win over your compliance to this backward system. To summarize this point, the example of colonized people being inferior serves the exploitive agenda of capitalism. And a major part of that agenda is in dehumanizing colonized people so that our exploitation is normalized. Our deaths are normalized, no matter how traumatic. And our continued suffering is normalized. And no matter what we all say, all of us on some level have been socialized to accept this narrative. Next slide. Since white supremacy, the myth, was created to justify the systemic exploitation of colonized people by the capitalist system, by this very reality, the definition of white supremacy or racism has to be two components, prejudice plus power. By power, we mean institutional power. In other words, an African can be evil to a European person. They can even kill that person. But the system is set up to ensure they are punished for this, and the prison system, which in the US alone, Africans and indigenous people account for 75% of those incarcerated, provides clear evidence of this point. Especially since despite what racists wish you to believe, there's absolutely no evidence that colonized people by percentage commit more crime. People commit crime consistent with their percentage of the population. So in other words, in the US, African people are 13% of the population and about the same percentage of the crimes committed, while we are 40% of those incarcerated. It's this type of disparity that defines white supremacy within a capitalist system. On the flip side, colonized people don't control the police. We don't control courts. We don't control the corporate world. We don't control the media. We have no mechanisms to carry out the systemic oppression of white people. The absolute best we can do is individual action against European or white people. And as the prison example illustrates, we cannot even do that without consequences. So the argument that anyone can be racist or reverse racism has no standing in science. A great example of this is the rash of European women or white women and people who call the police on African and indigenous people at the wink of an eye. Why do you think they do this? Even if they are only unconsciously aware of this contradiction, on some level, they understand that the mechanisms of white supremacy are such that they can make up anything they want, and the agents of capitalism, i.e. the police, courts, etc., will believe them over us. They know this will happen because they know consciously or unconsciously that their lives, their lies have more value than our lives and our truths. And although most of them don't know this part, what they believe has validity because the system is designed to oppress us. So if they don't understand why, they at least understand how the system has to assert their will against us. By the other hand, no African or indigenous person, unless they are completely lost and confused, believes that it will ever be in their best interest to have a disagreement with Europeans and expect the police, courts, etc., to play objective arbiters. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakura. And so that was very clear in terms of articulating, like, let's just deal with this right now. Like, racism is institutional discrimination against colonized people. That's the definition of it. It's not whatever anybody wants it to be, whoever anybody wants it to be. So let's go back to this concept of deconstructing reverse racism. Like, what is that? What's that about? You know, this concept that, well, anybody can be racist against anyone. This concept with the unfortunate situation where this African has apparently shot and killed this 5-year-old little white child. And people are saying, well, that, you know, nobody's making a fuss about that. That's reverse racism. Like, let's talk about that kind of thing and deconstruct it right here. So the first thing that we want to say is that a lot of this stuff, like using the little boy situation as example, this evolves out of the fact that the majority of European folks believe that they are oppressed. And the reality is that they are oppressed. There's no question that they're oppressed. The problem is that the way that they're conditioned is to believe that something that we're getting is taking something away from them. So in their eyes, the reason for their oppression is somehow related to us. And that's where the confusion is. Like Shakura said, we have no mechanisms to enforce any policy against anybody in this world. So who they should really be upset with is the capitalist system. That's the system that keeps them oppressed. That's the system that exploits them. When slavery ended in this country in 1863-65, what happened? The European plantation owners in the South, they told white workers, sorry, can't do anything for you. We got to pay these people now. We can't pay you anything. And this is 150 years ago. It's not like white people then said, nah, we ain't going for that. We need to see your financials. They didn't do that. Instead, they just started the Ku Klux Klan. And you fast forward 150 years to today, what's the rhetoric today? Sorry, we can't hire you. We can't pay you. These immigrants are taking your job. Same analysis they used 150 years ago. And our white workers today, are they saying, you know what, or any workers really, because it's a whole lot of people across all of these constructs who believe this backward stuff. So are all these workers today saying, you know what, we need to see your financials. We need to verify. No, they're not saying that. They're engaging in anti-immigration hysteria. So this is the reality that you should be looking at the system. If your business isn't open because of the pandemic, why are you not looking at the system that is the only system in the world that hasn't figured out a way to gain the upper hand on this virus. Why are you not looking at that? That's who you should be angry at. The people who create policy here and are deciding that their ability to make money is more important than your ability to be safe. But as long as the majority of people here don't look at, don't have a critical analysis of these things, like then they believe the white supremacist myths that, well, the reason why they don't have something or they're threatened is because we're somehow taking something from them. So this kind of thinking has led to this belief that, well, they're experiencing oppression. And this is true, you all, even for a lot of our white friends who call themselves anti-racist. Because I would argue, and I just hope folks can think about this when they hear it, I would argue that the majority of Europeans, even people who consider themselves anti-racist, they still believe that their lives are as hard, if not harder, than colonized people. Just like the majority of men, we believe that our lives are harder, if not harder, than non-men, women. We believe that. And so even though we might say, yeah, I'm anti-patriarchy, we still believe that we have it harder. And because we believe this, that makes it difficult for us to really be strong accomplices against patriarchy, because part of us, by saying that we suffer more in our lives, we're really consciously or unconsciously saying that patriarchy really isn't a thing in terms of being a systemic system that oppresses women and non-men. Well, the same with white supremacy. By white people believing by and large that their lives are harder or not, if not harder, hard or not harder than ours, they're essentially consciously or unconsciously saying white supremacy is really not that big of a deal, even though publicly they'll say it is. So this is something that has to be grappled with, because as long as we have this reality, we'll never get to, the basis of what's driving the system and how to correct it. Now, what we would say to this is that, yeah, you're oppressed in this society. So you got to look at the system and what this system is doing to perpetuate that oppression. And then we can talk about how we can possibly work together, to try to address those issues. But right now, I mean, we're just really a long way from that happening. And like I said, it's the same contradiction with men and patriarchy. So, this reflects a serious reluctance on the part of people to be able to evaluate this system objectively. And the reason why this exists is because of the concept of liberalism. And I know in this society, like, people learn that liberals and conservatives, it's a Democratic and Republican Party. That's the definition of liberal. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about the classic meaning of liberalism being an ideology that's designed to perpetuate injustice by not dealing with the conditions that create the injustice, right? So, for example, in this society, they say, don't ever talk politics or religion. That's a liberalist position, because what that is saying is that, well, we just have to be able to keep the peace even at the expense of justice. When clearly in this society, people should be talking about politics and religion all the time. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that said, Jesus, please protect me from your followers. And I think that's that's an example of the point that's being made here, that we have no understanding. Like, people are saying that they love Jesus in this society, and they at the same time support war, support children being caged in ICE camps, support police gunning down, systemically murdering African people on the streets. I believe that trans people and LGBTQ people should be murdered because of who they are. These are people that say they love God, talking about God as a jealous God. I remember when I was growing up, they used to say that all the time. God is a jealous God. God is a selfish God. And I'm like, that sounds like Jimmy Kane around the corner. That's like an abusive human being. That doesn't sound like an all-powerful being to me. Like, if you're all-powerful, you should have been able to deal with your insecurity by now. So I think, like, that's not a knock against you if you believe in God. If you take it like that, you're a part of the contradiction we're talking about here. What that is a knock against how white supremacy, patriarchy, and all these things have dominated the way we understand God. That's a knock against. So this type of liberalism, and liberalism is one of the vehicles that allows this confusion to happen, has created this reality where instead of dealing with the concrete, on irrefutable elements of the system, then people just can instead adopt this individualistic approach to the system. And everything that happens is just based on what I see in my individual life. That's the definition of how I define everything. So because I didn't get this job and I saw two brown people there and one of them got the job, well, then that's reverse racism. That's why I didn't get it. And I don't have to be responsible for any type of analysis. I don't have to answer to the fact that 4 out of 5 times, if you give the same resume to a European and a colonized person, the European will get the job offer. I don't have to answer to any of that. I can just base it on my individual experience. And you hear that all the time, right? You hear that all the time. All the time it happens. Yeah, I'm not, I'm the person, I'm dealing with this, and I saw this way. My friend told me this. My friend is from Cuba, and they told me that Cuba's an oppressive society. Haven't read one article about Cuba. So this is what we mean when we say liberalism, okay? So let's talk about some concrete ways that white supremacy can be attacked, right? And one of those ways is that we have to ask people to move beyond supporting random colonized people and move from that to supporting organized colonized resistance. What do we mean by that? Well, what we mean is stop looking at people like Nick Cannon, Kanye West, Beyonce, whoever, Ice Cube. Stop looking at these people. These people have never belonged to any organization fighting against injustice. And because they've never belonged to any organization, then I don't know why so many of you all look to them and base your analysis on things on what they say about things. Like they're entertainers, you all, that's what they do, and nothing against them. I enjoy the work of a lot of them, but I would never expect them to come to me. I would not expect Ice Cube to come to me for instructions on how to engage in writing rap lyrics. I wouldn't expect him to come to me for that because he knows a whole lot more about that. Well, by the same token, we're not going to shortchange ourselves. Like, we don't need to hear what Ice Cube has to say about our people's struggle for liberation. He's not involved in that struggle. When it benefited his career to be a spokesperson for that struggle, he was that spokesperson. When he decided it benefited his career to be, why are we there yet? And to not talk about politics for years after he had talked so militantly about it in the early 90s, then he was that person. So clearly, we can't trust that model. Like we're saying that you got to be involved in the movement. You got to have some skin in the game. You got to participate before you're going to have any credibility. And all of us need to start looking at it like that. Years ago in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we used to do a lot of work with hip hop artists in the early 90s. Especially KRS-One from Boogie Down Productions. We did a number of events with KRS-One. And those of you who are hip hop heads and hip hop history, then you know that KRS-One's album in 1990, Edutainment, which to me was one of his best ones. On that album, he had several snippets of speeches by Kwame Ture. And that was obviously because of the work we were doing with him. Otherwise, there would have been no way he could have been able to achieve that. And at that time, we were also doing lectures where Kwame Ture would speak and KRS-One would speak on the same platform, one after the other. And so some of us, being younger and being excited by all of that and, all the large crowds that would come out during that time, like there was talk with KRS-One about forming some sort of partnership. Like I remember being in meetings where they were talking about even putting the APRP logo on the next BDP album and doing things like that. And so I remember once we had this conversation when Kwame was here, and we sat down with Kwame and had the conversation, and Kwame's position was, no, that's not a good idea. And of course, I remember myself being young and being into BDP and KRS-One, like I saw it as a lost opportunity for us not to take advantage of that. And then I listened to what Kwame was saying, and he talked about these people are entertainers. They're not participants in our liberation struggle. And the problem is that they can be saying the right thing today, and tomorrow they'll be saying something completely different. And if we align our name with them, then when they start saying something completely different, then we lose credibility with the people. And at first when he said that, I didn't understand it. But then the next year or two, when KRS-One started making Sprite commercials, then I kind of started to understand it a little better. Clearly that was not the vision that we wanted to be affiliated with. So we can't look to these people. We can enjoy their talents. Certainly, we should do that. But I'm not going to look to Cardi B for my analysis on what's best for our people's liberation, what's best for humanity. We have to get serious about looking to the people who are demonstrating that they have skin in the game and have a commitment. So if you want to support somebody, there are a number of organizations. When we did the event on Black August last week, we talked about the Jericho movement. You can certainly support them. And I'm talking about movements that have been around for decades, okay, and have, definitely demonstrated that they're committed to this work. So you should definitely look at organizations like them. You should look at organizations that are on the ground. If your politics support the Poor People's Campaign, you should look at that and become a part of that, because at least they're trying to do work. And unlike all these other people, like the people in the Poor People's Campaign they don't criticize revolutionaries that are doing work, because a lot of them are doing the work, so they understand and respect that. So you should be a part of that. There are so many organizations. There's so many African anti-war organizations, Pan-African organizations, Black nationalist organizations, multiracial organizations, whatever your fancy. We're not here to tell you what to do, but we're saying that look to those entities who are on the ground doing the work as the medium for you to support them financially, support them in every way, and share their work as much as you share what Kanye West said or what Beyonce said. Share quotes and articles, share the hood communist articles as much as you share what Kanye West said last week. If we started doing that, then the ideas that are in the hood communist articles, the humble articles I write for my blog, etc., those ideas will start to gain more traction, you all. But as long as all we're doing is, forwarding what Kanye said, then all that does is create more confusion and idiocy. And then the ideas that really are the kind of things people should be talking about, thinking about, discussing, sharing, then, it's just a small number of people who actually get to experience that. And so we need your help in doing that. And so a good way you can do that is by really taking this seriously. Like, get beyond random people. Kanye West was a random person, okay? Nick Cannon is a random person. Both of them have been saying nonsense for years. Like, if you follow them, it shouldn't be any surprise that they're spewing out such garbage today. So stop advancing that and start advancing the work of people who have demonstrated that they have a strong analysis. That's what our people need to hear. They know what Kanye's talking about. Like, help us out. That's how you can do that. So that's one thing that can really help to combat white supremacy, okay? Another thing is we got to get people who say that, and I'm talking primarily to my white family here, we got to get, and yeah, I say white family because we are for people who are fighting against injustice. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a Martian from Mars with one eye, transgender. If you fighting against the capitalist system, then I'm in the pit hole with you. Because I've met over the years plenty of African people that will sell us out with the blink of an eye. So I'm sorry, y'all. I'm not new to this struggle. I'm beyond that. So I'm talking to my white family people right now, and I'm saying to you, like, if you all want to be accomplices to our struggle, you have got to decide that you're going to understand what our struggle is about. If you don't know anything about the Pan-African movement, you don't know anything about the Black nationalist movement, if all you can do is repeat Zionist talking points about Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, then you're not an accomplice to African people. This is not about what you agree with. It's not your struggle. You don't have to agree with anything. You said that you were going to support our right to self-determination. And so even if we're wrong, we have a right to struggle through that. We don't need your help with that. We'll get through it. Our people will decide what's right. But if you're sincere and you really want to support that, then y'all have to get serious about understanding what our lives are like, what our struggles are like. And that means studying the people who have been engaged in our struggle. You can say whatever you want about Farrakhan, but one thing I know is that he's been in the nation 60 years. And most of you haven't even been in an organization 5 minutes. So I'm supposed to listen to you before I, try to hear what he's talking about? Yeah, I've studied him. You'll have to study him 20 years before you catch up to the study I've done on him. So I don't need anybody to tell me about their positions or anything about them. But what I do know is that they're in every inner city in this society, in neighborhoods that most of you wouldn't even set foot in. And they were the first organization to make contact with me when I was a wayward youth. So you got to understand that if you're going to be our accomplice, and you have to understand what that means and how to engage that and respect that. You got to understand the Pan-African movement. Like people tell me, like I had a guy before the pandemic, white gentleman, I went in the store and I had a t-shirt on that had Kwame Nkrumah on it. And so if the shirt has a comment Nkrumah makes about, until Africa's free, no African will be free. And so this guy looks at the shirt and he's like, well, I've been to Africa. I know about struggles in Africa. I said, well, who is the guy on my shirt? I don't know. I'm like, well, then you don't know much about it, because I said, what do you know about Pan-Africanism? He's like, well, I know all about it. I've studied it. I took all these classes. I'm like, well, if the classes didn't talk to you about Kwame Nkrumah, then you don't know anything about Pan-Africanism. I mean, that's absurd. That's like saying that you understand smoothies, but you don't deal with fruit. Like, that's just like a core ingredient there. Like you have to have in order for it to work. So, that type of thing has to stop if you're really going to be an accomplice. Like for me, I put it to you like this. The reason why I have the position I have about oppressed people is that I've allowed myself to do something that most of you, just speaking honestly, don't have the courage to do. I put myself in uncomfortable positions so that I can become a stronger human being. So that means putting myself in a position to organize and support people in other struggles constantly, all the way including like doing security for trans marches, for example. I hear people there, they say all kind of things about cis or heterosexual men or whatever you want to call it. And I understand that when they do that, they're speaking from their pain and their trauma. Like it's not personal against me. And if I can't understand that, I shouldn't be there. When women speak, I've been to women marches doing security supporting, and they say all kind of bad things about men. And I hear them say it, and I'm like, most of the time, like, yeah, that's true. They're absolutely right when they say that. Like, if I can't be there and be politically sophisticated and mature enough to engage in that work without taking it personal, then I shouldn't be there. Well, by the same token, if you're engaged in calling yourself a supporter and accomplice of African people, and then the minute you get into an African circle and somebody says something that's not inclusive of you or centering you, then you don't need to be there. You're not qualified to be there. And all you're doing is creating problems. This one guy was telling me he did a thing in Oakland, European gentleman, and the kids laughed at him. The African kids laughed at him. And then the whole thing came about that. And he's like, what do you think of that? I'm like, I think it's a pity and a shame that you were even there. You should not have been there. You weren't qualified to be there. And all you did was just go there and center yourself. And now you're going around telling people this, which compounds the problem. So if you really want to help and you really want to be somebody that's making moves, like we don't just need people to go out and fight with the police on the streets. We don't need people to just go out and fight with white supremacists on the streets. In reality, to me, you're not even really helping us by doing that. I know you think you are because it's exciting and it's adventurous and all that, but you're really not, because what happens with those white supremacists and those police is they get angry because their lifestyle is dysfunctional anyway, and it's based on illegitimate values. So they internalize that anger. And guess what? Later on, when nobody's around, they go out and look for people to take that anger out on. And guess who they're looking for? It's not you, it's us who they're looking for. And we have plenty of data to support that. So it's not helping us. Like, what we would prefer you do, instead of doing that all the time, I'm not saying that's not a good thing to do that. Of course it is. I was doing it before most of you even knew how to spell it. So it's not that. But what we would prefer you do is go to your white communities, start knocking on some doors and talking to some white folks and getting white people to understand these issues that are happening here. That's really what would help. That would help us more than anything, because every time we try to move, it's working class white people that are the first obstacle in our way. So the best thing you can do to support us is go get your family members, your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors. That's what you can do to help us, and work with them and organize them. We've been asking you to do this for 50 years and it still doesn't happen. Like, that's not as fun and adventurous as going on the street and picking up the canisters and hurling them back at the police. Yeah, I get it. But that's not moving us forward in terms of how we need to engage. We got to get organized. So we ask you to do that, please. And we say that because the consciousness we need to combat white supremacy, and when we say combat white supremacy and patriarchy, we're talking about combating capitalism, because those are the appendages of capitalism. So the consciousness can only come through organized efforts. It has to be organized efforts to change the narrative. We can't just hit the streets. It's great. Like, I used to live in Portland, so I can talk about Portland because I did a lot of organizing work in Portland. A lot of you know this. So it's great to see 80 days on the streets, but I can tell you the conditions of the 35,000 Africans in Portland, Oregon, the thousands of indigenous people, the Asian people, the trans African people in Portland, I can tell you them 80 days on the street has done nothing to improve the conditions of those people. So that's what I'm concerned. That has to be the gauge for our work, right? If we're saying we're out there because, quote unquote, Black Lives Matter, and we're doing all this, putting all these resources into all this stuff every day for months, and we have not done anything to improve the lives of the people who are impacted by this, we got to re-examine that, you all. That's got to be looked at again. And what we're trying to say, and I know most of you are never going to listen to us because you don't listen to African people, and that's okay. But it's our responsibility to say it anyway, that y'all got to start organizing your people. You can do that. We can't do it, nor do we desire to do it. That's your job to do that. So you got to start doing that. So if you really want to help, that's the best thing that you can do. No question about that. And then another thing that you can do is you can start supporting colonized organizations, which means you have to start learning about these organizations. Because what I find is that most of the time when people, and this is for everybody, Africans, indigenous people, we know nothing about these organizations. I got so sick and tired of whenever somebody goes to prison, well, do you think they should be in prison? Do you think Bill Cosby should be? I don't care if Bill Cosby's been a POS for decades. If you don't know that, you don't know much about Bill Cosby. I knew that in 1984 when he came to the State Fair here in Sacramento, and his Cosby show was brand new. And the woman got up and said, it's a great African, quote unquote, American show. And it's not an African American, it's an American show. And until we learn how to integrate into America, I stood there in person and watched this fool talk like this. And that was almost 40 years ago. So I knew then at 22 years old that Bill Cosby was a POS. So I didn't, I have no problem understanding the allegations against him. And like people talk, well, how come, we have to start studying this stuff. I was traumatized by white supremacy. I didn't talk about it for 25 years. That's what happens when you get trauma. So if you're a man talking about, well, the women didn't talk about it, for 30 years, like you sound stupid to people that understand trauma. We got to start studying these things. We got to start studying these movements. So learn about these movements. People talking about Bill Cosby in prison. I'm like, well, what do you know about Mutulu Shakur, Jamil Alameen, Sundiata Acoli? What do you know about Jalil Montequin? What do you know about these people that are in prison? I want to talk about them, the political prisoners. They can bury Cosby under the jail, and I wouldn't give two thoughts about it. But we know nothing about the people who were in prison because they fought for us. They fought for us. They fought in the Black Panther Party, in the Black Liberation Army, in the Republic of New Africa. These people are in prison, y'all, for years, for the rest of their lives, and we don't know anything about it. So the first thing we can do is start learning about that. Learn about the work of the American Indian movement. Learn about what they're still here, you all. They're not from the past. They're still here. And if you're talking about you support indigenous people, but you don't know anything about indigenous organizations, then you don't support indigenous people. It's just plain and simple. How are you supporting them? And you don't support their expressions of self-determination. You don't even know about their expressions of self-determination. You don't even know about groups like Red Nation. You don't know what their position is. You don't know what their ideologies are. You don't know what their objectives are. You don't know anything. People, how? You don't know what ethnic buy-in is. You don't know that that's the youth movement in the Philippines, national liberation movement. You don't know anything about that. But yeah, you support, Asians' right for self-determination. The Arab Resource and Organizing Center that does wonderful work to support the Palestinian people. You don't know anything about that. We know about it. We study it. We read about what they send us stuff. We read all these organizations. We read it. I can sit down and talk to you about the Pahasapa, Wounded Knee. I can talk to you about Crazy Horse, the history of resistance, indigenous resistance, how Crazy Horse went against Red Cloud. I can talk to you about all of that, you all. The Lakota people, I can talk, I study, because in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we study that. We study that history. I can tell you all about Anime Pictou Aquash and how the FBI set her up to be murdered on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I can tell you how from 1972 to 1976, the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota had the highest murder rate in the country. And all of that was facilitated by this federal government, that they were the ones behind. They armed a group of people called the Guardians of the Oglala Nation, but they were the goon squad, really, and they were murdering people from the American Indian movement and people that supported them. We can tell you in the party, we can tell you all about that history because we've studied it, but you don't know anything about that. But yeah, you support indigenous people. That's got to be corrected if y'all are serious. You got to know about the Arab Resource Center. You got to know about the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You don't know anything about it. We say Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Amilcar Cabral. You don't know anything about it. But yet people call Amilcar Cabral and Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré Marxist-Leninists. You don't know anything about it. Well, how are you supporting us? With that kind of support, we don't need enemies. Like, y'all got to get serious about this. So we ask you to do that. We ask you to get serious, okay? And again, stop identifying with us through celebrities. Celebrities are people who have committed to sell their art to the capitalist system for profit. Now, they might come out and make a good record or a good movie, but then they might come out and not do that. And the reason why it's like that is because as a people, we're not organized. Don't you ever ask yourself the question, why is it that in 1968, James Brown came out with Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. By 1984, what was James Brown singing about? Living in America. In 1972, the Isley Brothers had Harvest for the World, Fight the Power. All their songs were like that, right? The Pride, all their songs were talking about that, right? Social justice songs. By 1984, the Isley Brothers were singing Between the Sheets. You ever ask yourself how that happens? Because it's the masses of people that shape culture, not the other way around. So in the 60s, when we had mass movement, the artists were influenced by that. In the 80s, when we had the individualist culture, they're influenced by that. So you have to understand that. You can't identify our struggle through celebrities. Again, you have to do that through the organized expressions of our people. And to do that, you got to understand who those organizations are, what work they're doing, okay? So please learn about that. Please learn about genuine African and indigenous movements and organizations and support them in concrete ways. And how do you learn about them? Well, you have to be in organizations, and your organizations have to have study processes that study these things. That's how we know. We know all this stuff I just gave you about the American Indian movement history. That's not just stuff I've read on my own, although I read a lot of it on my own, but that was inspired because organizationally we study it. You know, we can tell you about that. We can tell you about the Irish Republican movement in Ireland. We can talk to you about the ideas of James Connolly and his Marxist analysis of neo-colonialism in Ireland. Irish people struggled to liberate themselves from British imperialism for going on 900 years. We can talk to you about the struggles between the Irish Republican Socialist Party and Sinn Féin and the Irish Republican Army. We can talk about all that because we study it. We study it, you all. So we're asking you to do that. Because if you don't know any of that, why are you talking about the Irish movement? And I don't want to talk to you about it because you don't know what you're talking about. Like, get serious. Get a study process in your organization and learn what these folks are doing. They're doing good work. And of course, to do that, again, we say it all the time, you've got to be in organizations that have organized political education processes. And those political education processes have to be anti-white supremacy. And we believe they have to be anti-patriarchy. We don't believe patriarchy is a good thing. I understand there's a movement among African people to try to, paint patriarchy as something positive that needs to happen to our people. But you know what's funny about that, you all, is nobody bothers because of patriarchy. Like there was a stream I saw the other day on social media, and these African youth were asking about polygamy. And one of them asked me about it. And I said, well, I just think it's interesting that whenever the topic of polygamy comes up, no one even thinks to look at, well, what do African women think about it? Like that should be the first place we go, right? They're the ones impacted by polygamy. And my point about this is you cannot find a single African women's organization, and there are many on the continent. There's the Organization of Angolan Women, the Pan-African Women's Association, Azania. There's the UDAMA, the General Union of Guinea-Bissau, Women in Guinea-Bissau. There's the women's wing of the Democratic Party of Guinea. There are women's wings all over Africa, y'all. We know this because we work with all of them and we feature them. They were featured in our African Liberation Day program just a couple of months ago. Their presentations are on YouTube and they tell you in clear terms, no, we don't support polygamy. So if it makes sense to me, if you want to get a valid opinion on white supremacy, you would go to the people impacted by it. If you want to get a valid opinion on patriarchy, you would go to the people impacted by it. So that's why we say it has to be anti-patriarchy. It has to be anti-homophobia. We are not, look, I don't understand why those of you that make that an issue, I don't know why I don't see how you have time to even worry about that. I'll be 59 years old next year, and not 1 second of my life has somebody being gay impacted anything I'm doing in my life. So if it's impacting you, you need to evaluate what's going on with your life and how you're able to focus your life on what you need to do. Because I'm telling you, nobody outside of me is stopping me from doing what I want to do. Even if they were trying to do that, they can't do it. So I understand why this is such a problem. Like, to me, the bigger issue is once we start saying, well, we want everybody to accept these people, then we can never have unity. The only way you have unity is you have to say, we accept everybody. And you have to learn how to get politically mature enough to work through your differences, because you're not going to all agree. You're not going to come from the same place. To me, to be honest with you, my personal beliefs, I think that people spend too much time getting high. I have never smoked weed in my life. I think it's a waste of time. That's my view. You can't change my mind. I've had this view for over half a century, and I will have this view until I die. That's my opinion. But I would not make that a condition of working with you to liberate our people. That's insanity to me. I think it's a waste of time to drink alcohol. I don't understand why people don't exercise. There's a lot of stuff that I disagree with, but I would never make those things conditions for us to work together to liberate humanity. And I don't understand people that do, because those things have nothing to do with our ability to make our movement stronger. And I'm saying that because I work with all kinds of people, so I don't see how it's done that. And if you haven't worked with them like I have, you're not gonna be able to convince me that it will, because I'm gonna tell you don't know what you're talking about. You basing your stuff on something else. And I'm saying that unity is strongest when we have the ability to put everything aside except our liberation and fight for that. So yeah, your organization have to have an anti-homophobic position, anti-white supremacy, anti-patriarchy. That's what we ask you to do. And the last thing we ask you is support African revolutionary analysis and organizations, because we need that support. We need all the support you can give us, because our work is intense. It's not in the media. It's not something that we're not getting any of the aid from the federal government, nor will we accept it. You know, in fact, there was, when that terrible movie came out with Spike Lee, Black Klansman, there was, I won't get into details, but there was a possibility that the APRP could come into some royalties because of the depiction, the terrible depiction of Kwame Ture in that movie. And, you know, we would never accept money for something like that. Like, you know, none of us have any desire to be affiliated with Spike Lee. You know, we already had that discussion about affiliating with celebrities, especially some celebrities. So we wouldn't do that. So, you know, whatever support you can provide, it's appreciated. And for those of you who want to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party, if you're African, we invite you to come to our site, aaprp-intl.org, and inquire about how you can join and join one of our work study groups, political education again. And my blog there is abetterworld.me. The Truth Challenge have articles on there, have an interesting article I wrote just a day or two ago about Kamala Harris and that whole concept of, you know, African bourgeois political struggle and people acting like, you know, there's no class struggle in our community and that, you know, Kamala Harris and the working poor among African people, that's the same thing. So the article talks about that. And then Hood Communist is another one that has articles from many different African revolutionaries from many different places around the world. And I'm fortunate enough to contribute to that one. So we ask you to support all of those. If you want to join the APRP, let us know. If you're not African and you want to join an organization, you want to start a really strong organization with political education, if that's what you want to do, we'll even help you do that. And we don't charge you to do that. We're revolutionaries. We're trying to change the world. We just want, if you're serious, we'll help you do that. We'll share resources with you. We'll help you build you don't have to be African to do that, because we want to build a worldwide fighting force to fight against this unjust system. So at that, I'll stop. Shakura, is there anything that you can see that we need to deal with before we let everybody go?
No, not at this time.
All right. So, yeah, you know, and I, you know, I mean, obviously Facebook, like people were saying a lot about patriarchy on the Facebook comments, you know, I mean, we hear you, you know, we articulated our position, we stand by it. We respect you for yours. We certainly don't agree. Okay, you know, we are fighting to overthrow patriarchy. And again, we take our lead from African women. That's what we do. You know, it's not about men talking about patriarchy, just like it's not about Europeans defining what white supremacy is. We take our lead from women and non-men, and that's what they're saying. That's what our women's organizations in Africa are saying. So that's going to be our position. That'll be my position till I take my last breath. So we appreciate each and every one of you. Glad you're here. We will be back next week with another topic. We hope that you take what we're saying to heart, get involved in organizations. You can be the baddest individual in human history, but you're going to die. And if you don't engage what you're doing and build with other people, then your work dies with you. So to keep it going, get involved in organizations working for justice. We thank you all for sharing this hour with us. We'll see, hopefully, as many of you as possible next week. Shakura, you have a great rest of your evening, my daughter. And have revolutionary conversations with your children. Clearly, that's what we do. So we encourage you to do that. Join an organization, forward ever, backwards never. We hope everybody has a great rest of your evening.
Bye, everyone.